A letter by Arthur Belmont Osborne III. Head bodyguard to an NSA spy. As he starts out, I arrived in South Vietnam on September 15, 1966. I departed from South Vietnam on July 13, 1968. I enlisted in the United States Army on October 10, 1965, shortly after my 17th birthday. I enlisted because I wanted to fight for my country. I volunteered for Vietnam. When I arrived in Quy Nhon, I was assigned to Company B, 41st Signal Battalion. From September 1966 until November 1966, I worked as a driver and bodyguard for the commanding officer of Company B. On my first day in Quy Nhon, I was flown by a Huey helicopter a little over half the way to the top of Vung Chua Mountain. My job was to unload electronic equipment of communications type and safeguard it until a squad of soldiers walked down to carry the equipment back to the top of the 6,000-foot plus mountain. The top half of the mountain was blanketed in fog. I was alone and scared, but I did my job. I was not shot at, and I fired no shots in combat. In early November 1966, my life changed dramatically. One evening, another soldier and I were ordered to drive a deuce-and-a-half truck to the U.S. Air Force Base at Phu Cat. We were ordered to load the truck with bags of cement and to bring them back to Company B. We drove to Phu Cat and loaded the sacks of cement and were stopped going out the gate by the Air Force Phu Cat police. We were arrested by the Air Force police pending court-martial for theft of the truck, the sacks of cement, and all of our weapons. I refused to talk to the police. We were jailed until the middle of the next day, when Captain Walter S. Kulbaki, commanding officer of Company B, 41st Signal Battalion, drove us to our base. We were out of trouble. When I got back to Company B, many people told me thanks for not talking. U.S. Army Sergeant Major Maroney, who had ordered me to get the bags of cement, thanked me, as did Captain Kulbaki. Other soldiers told me that the reason that we were free and out of trouble was that another soldier in Company B, an SP-4E4 enlisted man, David Richard Santis, had gone into Lieutenant Colonel Stringfellow's headquarters and demanded that the commander of the 41st Signal Battalion offer to get me and my partner in crime freed by trading refrigeration equipment with the U.S. Air Force General in charge of the Phu Cat Air Base. Stringfellow refused, and Santis told him that he had 1 hour to change his mind and make a deal with the Air Force General. Santis told Stringfellow that if he did not make such a deal to free me and the other soldier, he would kill Stringfellow, and nothing on earth could save Stringfellow. Santis then walked out of the gate into the city of Quy Nhon. Within 20 minutes after the meeting, Stringfellow ordered every vehicle in the base to crisscross Quy Nhon. The men in the trucks were to scream continuously that everything was okay and Santis could come back to the base. A short time after I got back to Company B, Santis came back to talk to me. My mind was reeling when Santis told me that Stringfellow had ordered the raid on Phu Cat bags of cement. The purpose was to get concrete slabs under our soldiers' barracks and bunkers. Santis told me that he was the man in charge of requisitioning material and equipment from the ships unloading at the mile-long pier jutting into the Pacific, virtually next door to our camp in Quy Nhon. Santis then told me that he could not reveal who and what he was. That was a military secret. Before he found me that afternoon, I had already heard that everyone called him General and saluted him when Santis crossed their paths. Santis then asked me if I wanted to stop being Captain Kulbaki's driver and take the job of being his personal bodyguard. The American patriot inside me foolishly said yes. Besides, Kulbaki had sold me out. For the next year and 4 months, I rode through hell with Santis as his personal bodyguard. I also was a member of Santis' 45-man quick reaction force, which flew and/or rode into places where sensible soldiers had fled from. Mr. Santis only told me that he had been attached to the National Security Agency ever since he got out of basic training about 40 years after I left Vietnam. Mr. Santis explained to me that the man he worked for, Chief Warrant Officer 4 Antuna, had been a Navajo Indian code talker since right after Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Mr. Sandus told me that Mr. Antuna had been attached to the NSA since the day it was created by a top secret order by President Truman. Mr. Sandus told me that Mr. Antuna was the NSA's chief of station for over one half of the country of South Vietnam since the day he arrived in Quy Nhon. Mr. Sandus also told me that he had been appointed to be the NSA deputy chief of station since the day Mr. Antuna arrived in Quy Nhon. Mr. Sandus told me that he was the NSA deputy chief of station for the 40,000 square miles of the total 67,000 square miles of South Vietnam. Within days of becoming Mr. Sandus's personal bodyguard, I did know that he was responsible for the safety of over 40 U.S. Army communication centers across the middle half of South Vietnam. Combat stress events that I can still recall. A rescue of Sergeant Major Alvin Bunch from an angry mob of hundreds of Vietnamese civilians who were intent upon killing him because Bunch had thrown a bucket of water at the woman who we called the little old woman with her sewn up. Bunch had intervened to stop this Viet Cong tortured soul from using her machete on an old woman who was selling fish. This was a horrible horror show. The armed robber had been released from a Viet Cong prisoner of war camp, but our U.S. Army did not cut the twine that sewed her together from front to back. I never saw U.S. Army doctors or any other American doctors treat even one Vietnamese civilian for anything. B. I was coming down from the top of Vung Chua Mountain, where Mr. Sandus was inspecting the U.S. Army security units' work, which was to guard the security of the largest array of communications towers in South Vietnam. I was with Mr. Sandus, our driver, SP4E4 Arthur W. Trangmar, when from about 4,000 feet up the mountain, we saw 3 Vietnamese men with rifles running away from the Quy Nhon leper colony. Our quick reaction force used to have barbecue and beer parties there, when Sandus could trade for steaks on board the freighters lined up at the mile-long pier. Trangmar, Sandus, and I screamed minutes later when we saw Phantom fighter bombers from the Phu Cat Air Base bomb and strafe the leper colony. The Vietnamese leper colony had been safe for over 400 years. The Phantoms blew the hell out of the lepers and the leper colony as we stopped, screamed, and stared. We never went there again. For over a year, I saw a crazy naked man wandering the, quote, streets, close quote, of Quy Nhon, beating his bloody, filthy chest with a rock in each hand. He also was an escapee from the Viet Cong. Then finally, he was dead. D. One night, under typhoon conditions, I was ordered by Mr. Antuna to wake up Sandus and bring him to the U.S. Army Quy Nhon Communications Center, which was the 3rd largest classified communications center in Vietnam. From the panic in Mr. Antuna's movements and his voice, I was crying when I got to Sandus's bunker and woke him up. Sandus dressed and ran barefoot to the, quote, Camo, close quote, center. When Sandus came out of the communications center bunker, we ran together to the bunker that housed the 45-man quick reaction force. There, Mr. Sandus shouted to everyone to wake up. When everyone was standing at attention, Sandus barked out that he had needed 3 volunteers for a suicide mission. Almost all of the men volunteered. Sandus checked the gear of 3 volunteers, and Sandus, Trangmar, and the 3 quick reaction force soldiers and I boarded a couple of jeeps and drove to the adjoining airbase. 2 Huey helicopters and their 5-man volunteer crews awaited us. Mr. Sandus briefed us all. We were headed in this typhoon to the base of the 22nd Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN Infantry Division. When we got there, the 6 of us would rappel down ropes, try to find the Angry 26 Communication Center and use our PRC-6 satellite telephones to report to Mr. Antuna if the Angry 26 Communication Center, its cryptographic equipment and codes have been destroyed by the incendiary and high explosive bombs used by Mr. Santis. Santis briefed us that one of the 6 of us had to survive long enough to make such a report, or B-47 and B-52 bombers would have to assume that at least one of our KW-35 cryptographic code machines had been captured intact and thus carpet bomb the entire base of the 22nd ARVN Infantry Division. All there would have to die. As I recall, our helicopter gunships were about 8 minutes out from our target when one of the 6 cryptographic code equipment operators called from his spider hole and reported the complete destruction of the Angry 26 Air Mobile Communication Center. I can only hope that my 2 children are pleased about this. Neither Santis nor I had to rappel down a rope from a gunship under fire in a typhoon, nor did the other soldiers. The 2 Huey helicopter crews did not have to be killed. E. Virtually every day of the approximately 485 days that I served as Mr. Santis' personal bodyguard, we flew to and from the approximately 47 communication centers in the approximately 40,000 square miles of 1 and 2 core tactical zones of central South Vietnam. Santis had to bring new codes to every such communication center every month. Santis also carried cryptographic code machines to such communication centers on a regular basis. We regularly flew to communication centers in Nha Trang, Khe Sanh, Pleiku, Cam Ranh Bay, Phu Cat, Vung Chau, Korean Tiger Division Mang Ho Headquarters, Market Time Island, Tui Wa, An Khe, Phu Yen, Vung Tau, Dak To, Han Tri Island, Phan Rang, and many other bases. I can't remember the one of the Korean Tiger White Horse Division or the name of the location of the 22nd ARVN Division headquarters. The vast majority of the flights I took with Mr. Santis were on Huey helicopter gunships that Santis arranged with the officers of the 92nd Aviation Battalion in Quy Nhon. But we did make a large number of flights on fixed-wing airplanes. Whenever we flew on Huey helicopter gunships, Mr. Santis had the door gunners removed due to lack of security clearances, and he and I replaced the door gunners on their machine guns. Many times we dodged incoming fire and returned suppressive fire on the enemy soldiers. One flight on a fixed-wing aircraft, 8 small windows were created in about 2 seconds by enemy fire. On countless helicopter flights, we minimized enemy fire by flying just above the ground. Figuring 47 communication centers to visit at least once a month, that adds up to 94 flight missions a month times 16, a minimum of 1,054 flight missions in our 16 months together. In Jeeps and in 3/4-ton trucks, Santis and I traveled outside of American bases a minimum of 96 times, just to Vung Chua Mountain, the Mang Ho base of the Korean Tiger Division, and the Korean White Horse Infantry Division, whose base I can't remember the name of. Santis wore a thermite firebomb vest, overlain with stitched pockets holding clips, each containing 20 7.63 millimeter bullets. Santis also carried homemade, quote, C4, close quote, high explosive bombs when he carried cryptographic code machines. I rode, sat, flew, and fought next to him. So what was the problem? F. On one trip from Company B to the Mang Ho camp of the Korean Tiger Division, we lived through a virtual nightmare. Mr. Santis had to go visit the base. Monsoon rains prevented us from flying, so we drove in a sheet lightning sky, monsoon rain, thunderstorm world. We were driving on a bulldozed path that separated the jungle from the flooded rice paddies in an area of floodplain. The path was slippery with mud, yet we barreled along as Trangmar balanced speed and wrecking the 3/4-ton truck. The path was bordered on the jungle side by a fringe of high elephant grass and young bamboo. It curved so much that at any given point one could perhaps only see 20 to 50 feet in front of our truck. We were all three totally aware that we were in deep Indian country, and we were there on our own until the monsoon storm abated. Sanis was manning an M60 machine gun. I have a combination automatic rifle / grenade launcher, and Trangmar was driving with one hand and holding an M14 in the other hand. Only Sanis knew why we couldn't wait for the monsoon to pass. The Tiger Division codes would have expired at 4 p.m. Suddenly, we rounded a corner and saw about 16 double-file bikes ridden by North Vietnamese troops, heading toward us on the same bulldozed path. Sanis screamed, quote, "No," close quote, and so we did not open fire. Trangmar kept his foot on the gas. The shocked NVA troops all dived to their right into the elephant grass. More North Vietnamese Army troops, and this nightmare scene continued. Sanis said there were about 130 rows of this two-wide bike line of North Vietnamese troops that went past us in this fashion. These North Vietnamese Army troops had Kalashnikov automatic rifles across their shoulders and both hands on the handlebars of their bikes. If we had opened fire, I would not be recounting this incident. The North Vietnamese Army bike column outnumbered us 260 to 3. Without another incident, we got to the Mang Ho headquarters of the Korean Tiger Division. Sanis went to the communication center, did his thing, and then we drove back to Quy Nhon, to Company B. The return trip was a nightmare, but otherwise without incidents. G. At least once a month, Sanis and I had to go to Mang Ho headquarters of the Korean Tiger Division. We either went there by Huey helicopter or Trangmar drove us, depending upon the weather. The trail from Company B to Mang Ho in the valley regularly supported and sported Viet Cong or North Vietnamese Army heads mounted on sticks. Mang Ho camp always had suspected Viet Cong soldiers as Korean prisoners, walking all holding hands in a nightmare circle. It was always a nightmare formation inside a steel post and concertina wire fence. Why? Because if a sick, wounded, or tortured Viet Cong prisoner could no longer hold the hand on each side of him, a prison guard would open fire, and the surviving soldiers had to hold the hands in another circle that included the freshly killed or wounded Viet Cong prisoners. The Viet Cong prisoners could not drop hands even while groveling for food in a trough on the ground. H. On another trip to the Mang Ho base of the Korean Tiger Division, we had to drive our Jeep through a fierce battle between Korean soldiers and Viet Cong soldiers. We were going at the Jeep's top speed down a 15 to 12 foot wide dirt bulldoze trail when a Korean soldier fell wounded about 150 to 200 feet ahead of us. Trangmar slowed down. Sanis and I grabbed the wounded Korean soldier, and Trangmar hit the gas back toward Company B. I. On another trip through this same valley, we ran into an enemy ambush on 60 to 80 or so American soldiers. They were all pinned down in a stinking rice paddy, which was on the floodplain of a small river that ran in monsoon seasons. This line of rice paddies ran next to the two-lane road the U.S. Army had graded next to the area of elephant grass and bamboo, which bordered the jungle. The jungle was maybe 100 to 150 feet away from the rice paddy, where American soldiers were pinned down. Mr. Sanis used his PRC-6 satellite radio to call in bombers. A small fixed-wing spotter plane coordinated the bombing attack on the jungle, concealing the Viet Cong or North Vietnamese Army soldiers ambushing us. Within minutes of Sanis' conversation with the spotter plane pilot, 2 Phantom fighter bombers from the Phuket Air Base screamed up the valley towards us. Like a crazy person, Sanis stood up as the first fighter pilot dive-bombed to near ground level, right over our heads. Sanis waved his arm at the first Phantom pilot. The first bomber pilot released his 2,000-pound napalm bomb directly over our heads. The bomber flew off, and the second fighter bomber dropped its napalm bomb. The huge fire was the only thing you could hear or see from the jungle. After a while, and after Sanis emptied his shorts, we drove to our destination and then went back to Company B. That event rattled the hell out of us. J. 16 months of hanging out with Mr. Sandus was certainly an adventure. We spent over 80% of our time outside of American bases. And I mean over 80% of our time, night and day, for that 16 months. I was barely 18 years old and rarely had a bottle of beer when I got to Vietnam. By the time I got discharged from the United States Army, I was an alcoholic. I still am an alcoholic. I scare myself. I have never picked up a gun since I left Vietnam. I know picking up a gun is something I cannot do. K. On January 31, 1968, Sandus, Trangmar, and I were sitting drinking beer and eating fresh sandwiches that Sandus had stolen from the evacuation hospital on our Company B compound. We were celebrating by sitting on top of Sandus's bunker, celebrating his birthday. We suddenly saw a huge fire and then heard a colossal explosion of a gas storage tank. The tank was in a huge tank farm by the land end of the mile-long pier jutting out from next to the beach we were sitting by. As all three of us, in unison, started to slide off the top of the bunker, the huge oil and gas tank farm disappeared in a round of gigantic explosions. That was our invitation to the start of the largest battle of the Vietnam War, the Tet Offensive. Trangmar disappeared while Sandus and I ducked into his bunker and slipped into our war gear. Sandus ran out first, spun around, knocked me down, and covered me with his body as machine gun fire racked the trench outside our bunker. Sandus went back to the USA the next day, and I sat behind an M60 machine gun at the gate into our compound for the next 3 days. After Sandus left for home, I went to work in the personnel department at Headquarters Company's department compound until I left Vietnam on July 13, 1968. I was discharged from the Army on July 14, 1968. L. I knew I was mentally and emotionally damaged by my combat duty in Vietnam, but I never contacted the VA until November 15, 2010. I only went for help from the Veterans Administration, even then, because of the pestering of my old war buddy, David Sandus. When I got back from Vietnam until this day, I have been angry that we Vietnam War veterans were not, and are not, honored by other Americans for our combat service. Until now, I have never talked about my war to any of my family, friends, or colleagues. I know I was guarding a very important spy, Sandus. I don't want to remember my war experiences. M. I know that once, because of monsoon rains, I took Trangmar's job and drove Mr. Sandus to our antenna field in Army Station at the top of Vung Chua Mountain, a volcanic cone mountain about 6,300 feet above sea level. I know that once, because of monsoon rains, I took Trangmar's job and drove Mr. Sandus up to our antenna field and Army Guard Station at the top of Vung Chua Mountain, a volcanic cone mountain about 6,300 feet above sea level. I know that coming down the one-lane bulldozed road on Vung Chua Mountain on that inspection trip, rushing water coming out of the volcanic rock in a sand lens washed our Jeep off of the cliff-hugging one-lane road at about 5,500 to 5,700 feet above the flat ground at the bottom of the mountain. I know the Jeep held up for a few seconds while I leaped out of the Jeep onto the bulldozed path. I know I was shocked when a long time later I heard Sandus's preacher's voice on the path behind me. Sandus had leapt out of the Jeep while the Jeep frame hung up for a few seconds, and he angled his leap to land maybe 15 to 20 feet below the road, and he had climbed back up onto the one-lane road. N. I know that Sandus wore a thermite / high explosive suicide vest when we went to our crypto centers backpacking IBM cards or code machines. O. I know I once grabbed Santa's right arm to stop him from shooting a U.S. Army nurse, a major, for not immediately treating one of our soldiers that we had driven through enemy territory at night after he had pleaded with Santa's to not let him die. I know that Santa's broke my nose when I decided not to go out on a quick reaction force mission. I know I and Santa's guarded each other in a firefight that night, and we were both pretending we were not guarding each other. In short, I know that as part of my job of guarding Santa's, I went places, saw things, and did things in the line of duty that nobody should do. And to sum it up, I know the U.S. Army, the VA, and the American people didn't give a damn about what I did for my country. Americans figuratively just spit on its Vietnam combat heroes. P. If anyone wishes to confirm the effects of time that I spent guarding David R. Santis, Google his name. Then check my account with U.S. Army Joint Services Environmental Support Group, ESG, 7798 Cissna Road, Suite 101, Springfield, Virginia, 22150-3197. Signed, Arthur Belmont Osborne III. Note: how do you guard a man wearing a suicide vest on over 1,600 trips and go back home? Damaged.